You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in the show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hoosier Humanist Hour. This show, as usual, is brought to you by members of FreeThought Fort Wayne, a chapter of the American Humanist Association. If you want to find out more about our group, probably the best thing to do is visit us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/FreeThoughtFW. Our new and updated website is freethoughtfw.org, or you can send us an email, fortwayneaha@gmail.com. I think we have an interesting show today. We're going to be talking about the world in 20 years into the future. Now, we already did something similar, but I think we're going to hit on some different points this time. I think we're going to hit on like population growth, a little bit of religious changes, how our food is going to change, how some new jobs that are going to show up, some jobs that are going to go away, things like that. Today on the show, we have myself, V. We have Chris, Caleb, and our sound engineer, Andrew. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic, man.
Good. Well, let's get this show on the road. So the first thing that I was kind of looking up in terms of what would change over the next 20 years, and one of the big drivers that's going to change the world, I think, is population growth. Currently we're sitting at about 7.5 billion. We're estimated to reach about 9.1 billion by 2040. And, that's about a growth of 1.6 billion. 1.3 billion out of that is supposed to be just urban population. So most of the population that we're going to have is going to be in cities. Large cities are going to become larger. Cities of all sizes are going to grow. And, I think it has some unique challenges. Are you guys all concerned about population growth in the next 20 years? And what do you guys see as some of the challenges that we may face as the world grows at that kind of rate?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, and I believe we talked about this before the show, was just the sheer cost and manpower required to generate the amount of food that's going to be necessary to feed all those people. I mean, that's generally been the biggest concern for humanity across time, is being able to get, collect, find, maintain, and eat their food. And that problem doesn't seem to be changing much. It seems to be just as rampant today as it's ever been. We just happen to be in one of the better places in time to exist, really. I couldn't tell you the sheer amount of food that I unfortunately throw away, but that doesn't mean that there's a crisis across the board, or at least crises that need to be addressed. And I don't know how these population growth figures that you mentioned are going to affect, because you were saying that most of that growth is going to be in the urban areas.
Right. Yeah, it's all going to be in the cities. And what that does, is a lot more people are going to have to be fed by a lot fewer people. Well, by the same amount of people, because let's face it, today, most of the food is not grown in the cities. It's very little. So, that's going to be a big challenge.
Well, I know that there are technologies in place right now and research developments in progress, constantly trying to help solve this particular problem. I think the most promising are these urban farms that we discussed. Essentially what these are skyscrapers that are in and of themselves farms. That's basically it. So instead of harvesting, thousands of acres of prairie land or farmland, you get like a square block or whatever, and you build up as opposed to building out. And with developments in hydroponic, I believe is the word, technology,
Right.
and that plus our new capacity to engineer plants to grow in more specific conditions and to grow healthier and bigger with a bigger yield, et cetera, et cetera. When you combine all these factors and you put them in an environment where they're almost guaranteed to grow, I think that that's really going to be the solution here, just to build these sky farms, if you will.
Right. I mean, today, GMOs are feared by many people. Some GMO ingredients, not ingredients, but some GMO plants are even banned in certain parts of the world. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a challenge to overcome with just what people think about GMOs, and to make sure people are not afraid of them, and make sure that people understand that, this is not something to be feared. It's something to be developed, and to make sure that it's done safely, because that's really our only way to continue this growth without famines and disasters and all kinds of things like that. Chris, do you know? I mean, currently today, I'm aware of soybeans being GMO, some corn, a couple of grains. Do you know if there is any development in GMOs and like other plants and things like that?
Well, predominantly with GMOs, what you're talking about is crops. So that's why the majority of them are going to be soybean and corn. But, there have been successful ventures in other types of crops, different garden varieties of this, that, and the other. One of the most notable is in rice, because that's also a very important agricultural crop all around the tropical regions of the world. And so what they've done there is they've basically inserted a gene to help insert vitamin A into the rice, which is nice for keeping kids from going blind as a result of vitamin A deficiency. So that's kind of important when rice is the staple food of those locations.
I gotta just side note here for just a second. I got a tangent. Is this where possibly the stereotype that Asian people can't see come from? Is it literally because they can't see? Is this stereotype have some legitimacy to it because they don't get enough vitamin A in their diet on average?
Wow.
I don't know, man. I've heard this stereotype my whole life, and all of a sudden you tell me that in the more tropical regions where rice is the primary source of food, that they're not getting enough vitamin A per se.
To someone with a scientific mindset like you or me, we would find that somewhat reasonable to think, and mildly humorous. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, it's quite a racial insult, because it's really centered around the slant of their eyes.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah.
Well, that's I guess that solves that then. I guess I was just throwing nonsense out there. I didn't know that.
It's a good thought. It's a good thought.
I wonder if anybody's looking into maybe increasing the yield of rice, like how much rice we can grow per acre of land based on GMO technology. I'd heard of what you were just saying with the vitamin A, but I haven't heard of specifically increasing yield, or maybe increasing the protein content or anything like that.
Yeah, no, definitely in a number of crops, including rice, they have been working on variants that are resistant to flooding or drought, or pick up more nitrogen or phosphorus from the soil. As far as protein, I think that's been done.
Okay.
I'd have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure I've heard that being done as well. So yeah, we are working on that actively.
That's good. That's a good thing. Hopefully, kind of the reputation of GMOs doesn't sabotage that, because, it's so sad that the technology with this kind of potential has this negative reputation that's completely unfounded.
And the last thing, I think if I've heard it correctly, this has spread to various countries that could really benefit from GMOs, but they've heard these rumors, and certain special interest groups have taken an interest in making sure that countries don't engage in GMO technology or buy into the things. So, if I remember correctly, Afghanistan is actually one of those countries that have banned GMO crops, even though they could really stand to benefit to feed their people, which are starving.
Yeah, I mean, even European countries in some cases have banned, even the imports of GMOs, not just the growth, but even imports of GMOs. I believe in certain places around Europe are banned. So, it's just people distrusted.
And things like that, I don't tend to care too much about, just because of the fact that they're richer countries and they can afford to do that. But when poorer countries do it, it's really a shame, because the people pay for it in the count of lives lost.
Yeah, but even with the richer countries, food prices these days are set globally, and that's not going to change over the next 20 years. I mean, take a farmer in some poor country. He doesn't just sell his crops on the local market. With the development of transportation and the world being global, he can get a higher price selling it on the world market, with just a few clicks of a button on his computer and all that. His crops can easily be loaded and shipped around the world. So it's
no, I feel you guys.
It affects the entire world.
Yeah, you're right.
I think people tend to fear it unnecessarily for a number of reasons, but I think that the facts in and of themselves should speak for themselves. I mean, there's a lot of people that just don't know enough about I'm not gonna lie, I don't know very much about GMOs, but I know the sort of benefits that we've received. I'm looking here at an article to kind of back up something that I'd heard before, and this is what I was looking for. So there was a guy, his name was Dr. Barlaw, and that might be pronounced wrong, but he was responsible for creating a strain of high yield, disease resistant semi-dwarf Mexican wheat.
Okay.
And this one product is estimated to have saved 1 billion lives, or will save 1 billion lives. That's insane. That's a huge number. 1 billion. How many people can say that they've saved 1 billion lives?
Not many.
And this guy created a strain of high yield, disease resistant semi-dwarf wheat that can do that. That has saved countless hundreds of millions of lives at least already. Just when you take these and you're able to plant them in areas that normally aren't able to grow much of anything, much less something high yield worth eating, is just, I hate to say this, but it's almost a miracle, really. It's a marvel of our human engineering capabilities. It's just insane to me that we can do that, and it's a shame to me. I'm actually ashamed that there are so many people in this country that are so resistant to these ideas because they've heard rumors about XYZ that they often don't even want to fact check.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear people like, I don't know, I think a famous person out there is someone called the Food Babe, and she has millions of followers, and she'll say stuff like, if you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. I mean, that's completely insane. There's a lot of chemicals in all kinds of foods. Like, if you were to write out the chemical formula for sugar and try to pronounce it, 99% of people out there can't really pronounce it, and it's just sugar. But when you see some ingredients that don't really have simple names like sugar or milk or this or that, they have more technical names, and people all of a sudden fear these things. Or one of the famous things that she gripes about is something that's used in like floor cleaners and stuff like that, that's also used in food. Well, just because it's used in floor cleaners doesn't mean anything. I mean, things that are nutritious could be used for many different things. You can clean with vinegar, and I put vinegar every day on my salad, and it's great. It doesn't hurt you or anything. So it's just so sad that people like that have millions of followers, and those followers are fanatics, and they even go and, I'm going to use the word radicalize other people. They try to spread this nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're kind of touching on here reminds me, I mean, because normally if I talk to somebody who knows absolutely nothing about GMOs, they tend to just refer to these things as chemicals, and it becomes the fear of chemicals that drives their actions. And there was actually, for example, let me just take a step back here. People's misunderstanding of chemicals is just profound. I don't really know much about it, but I could tell you that everything is chemicals. I mean, what's his name? Neil deGrasse Tyson wanted to make this point very clear. He spelled it out. He says, look, guys, everything is chemicals. Everything. You, me, this table, everything is chemicals. And to kind of prove this point on this irrational fear, there was a radio DJ a while back that got in trouble because they told everybody that was listening that there was dihydrogen monoxide in the there's water in the water. I don't honestly know the technical name.
Dihydrogen monoxide is the chemical formula for.
Yeah, that's what it was. Excuse me. It was just saying there's dihydrogen monoxide in the water, and people freaked out. But he was literally just playing a joke. He was just saying there's water in the water.
Exactly.
But, when it comes to these GMO conversations with people who just are adamantly opposed to it for whatever reason, they'll usually refer to these things as chemicals. There's so many chemicals in that thing that you're eating. Your chemicals in your hairspray, blah, blah, blah. Just the chemicals in your hairspray and your food, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
It's just silly stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that these people don't realize is when you grow GMOs that are more resistant to disease, that are more resistant to droughts and stuff like that, you're actually helping the environment. You're using less irrigation potentially. You're and by that, you're not draining our rivers as much as you would otherwise. Or when you have disease resistance, you don't use as many pesticides or herbicides or things like that. So this technology can literally prevent all the stuff that these people are afraid of. The overuse of chemicals in farming and all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the farm water runoff is especially around here in Fort Wayne, you can see it. I mean, just look at any of these rivers and you can see the nasty filth. And I'm not necessarily equating that to the chemicals that are in the farms, but I mean, the farms themselves, just the sheer amount of agriculture that we have, all that crap eventually will leak into our river systems, which it has. And you start seeing the nasty waters that you see here. I mean, when I was on vacation, I was on vacation the last 2 weeks. And while I was on vacation, I went to a park down in Texas called Schlitterbahn.
Okay.
And most of the rides in this park are fed through the river that the park sits next to. And I'm looking in this river. You can walk past it. You can swim in it. And this water is pristine, absolutely pristine. But they've taken some serious measures to make sure that nothing's ever really going to contaminate that water beyond what it's already contaminated to. And it just blows my mind when I go to a place that's as highly populated as it is, and look at the river next to it and see how crystal clear those waters are. And then I come down here, and these waters, I don't think you could see a foot down.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily due to a runoff from farms and stuff like that, but that's certainly a concern. Some of the chemicals that we spray will leach into the rivers and pollute and all that, and GMO tech can prevent that. Even if it doesn't solve it completely, any amount of decrease is a good thing.
Yeah, and just to clarify, most of the problem with Fort Wayne's rivers is the fact that we have a lot of runoff from urban areas and erosion.
That's interesting.
So most of what the rivers are is because of everything that's put into the river without many filtration mechanisms in place to take care of that. So we actually don't have very many areas where we have good plants in place, water plants that can take such things out of the water and clean it up a bit.
Do you think it's reasonable within 20 years that we might be able to get these waters looking pretty good again?
Well, I would think that with all the riverfront development that Greater Fort Wayne intends on doing, I would assume that they would be smart enough to include that in their proposal.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I really hope so. Because I've been looking at these rivers my whole life, and I've been extremely unimpressed.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that they're doing something about it. That's awesome. Good for them. Good on them. Serious, man.
Well,
that's something to be proud of.
It's great. No, certainly if we take care of the rivers, they can become a lot healthier. And oftentimes it doesn't take that much. But so let's move on from GMOs, and let's talk about some of the other stuff that we can do in cities. For example, vertical urban farming, hydro and aeroponics that Caleb, you kind of very briefly mentioned. So, as populations grow in cities, a lot of people demand fresh food, stuff that was grown just recently. People ask for, food that hasn't been trucked for, hundreds and thousands of miles. So they decrease the carbon footprint. So then, we try to at least help a little bit of the problem with global warming. Many of the ways that have been proposed are rooftop farming, basically growing small amounts of vegetables or herbs and things like that on the rooftops of building. Or Caleb, as you said, maybe construct whole buildings or take out, maybe a few floors of a building, or just certain sections that are well exposed to sunlight where some food is grown. So that's, it may not make a huge difference, but even if it makes, even if it reaches to the point of, just a few percent, I think that'll be significant. If we can grow just a few percent of our tomatoes and cucumbers and maybe, a few herbs within cities, considering that today that percentage is 0, I think we can offset quite a bit of, global warming gases, and it'll be fresher, tastier food, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And with, like you were saying with the hydroponics, there are certain things you can do in hydroponics, and given the fact that you're in a controlled environment that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do out in the field, especially if you wanted to do it at a quote low risk. I mean, every farmer that plants anything, there's always a chance that something could go horrifically wrong and they lose their crop. But in the controlled environments of an urban farm, for example, I think, I honestly haven't validated this as any fact or anything, but I would think that those conditions would make it safer to grow crops, and that you're less likely to lose yield for whatever reason, be it pests or fungus or what have you. So I think that's one huge advantage.
No, absolutely. That's absolutely true. And you may also be able to extend the growing season. Maybe instead of just growing one crop per year, maybe you can do 2. Because if you're in an enclosed building, you can get a little bit of that greenhouse effect. So maybe you start growing a little bit earlier in the season, and you'll be able to continue growing until a little bit later in the season. So, you extend a couple months on each side, and there you have a second crop, potentially just instantly doubling your yield per given amount of area. So all that stuff is, people have been looking into that. And also, when you consider, kind of the vertical aspect of this, you can have many layers of plants within a building, because you're not growing it on soil to begin with. So why not have 2 layers of plants or 3 layers of plants, potentially further increasing yields by, growing even more plants per given amount of area. So I think, stuff like that can help a lot.
Yeah. The thing that we do have to be mindful of when doing things like that, as much as I love that idea, because I've always kind of dreamed about like Fern Gully, to where you're kind of more coexisting with nature, and having green skyscrapers like that are definitely a step forward. The problem's going to become making sure that you account for pollination when pollination is required to form the fruit, which would require access to a pollinator or would require manual pollination. That would also put stress on seed stocks, meaning that you need some sort of mechanism to create the seeds if you can't pollinate in those environments. So it would make an interesting situation, to say the least.
Yeah, that's true. That's certainly an aspect I hadn't thought about. I'm hoping that whoever, because this has been described in multiple articles that I've read, and I'm hoping that the people that are working on these kind of technologies and are envisioning these kind of futures have thought about that.
Well, the reason why I mentioned that is because if we're talking about 20 years into the future, honeybees might all be extinct 20 years into the future. It's so bad with losing honeybees, and they are among our top crop pollinators, that's a really horrible situation to consider.
I didn't realize that the honeybee situation is still severe.
Yeah.
It has improved at all by the standard of, say, the last 5 years, because I honestly haven't looked into this.
I don't guess I'm not entirely sure about that. I wasn't thinking there was any improvement last time I checked, but I could be wrong.
Oh, okay.
I didn't think there was.
But either way, I mean, I've heard my entire life, that the honeybee thing might be a huge problem. And luckily I was fortunate enough to be part of a school that warned us of global warming, that the coral reefs might disappear one day, for example. But with the honeybee situation, when I was in California going to school, we used to have killer bee drills. And it was my understanding that it was the killer bees that might be killing off the honeybees and outbreeding them in a sense as well. That was the situation I grew up with. I remember having honeybee drills, which are pretty bizarre. When you hear that bell, you just run into the nearest classroom, shut the door behind you, and wait it out. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked tangent here.
Oh, no, I had never heard of that. I thought that was fascinating. Killer bees. Wow.
Yeah.
Never heard of that before.
They have been out competing and pushing out certain honeybee populations. So it is a real threat as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. Yeah, I think it's multiple. I think honeybees are just being hit from multiple things. Kind of what you're saying, those killer bees, they're being hit from some of our farming practices like monoculture farming, and many different things are hitting the bees from multiple sides. So, but the situation is not good. I think at best they may have stabilized the situation, but I don't think that it's improved. But yeah, it's definitely, if the bees die, like none of the predictions that we're talking about for the next 20 years will happen. Like, everything that we're talking about today depends on the bees surviving.
Oh, goodness.
I don't care if we're talking about electronics or flying cars. If we have no bees, we have no people to do that.
It's pretty wild to think about, though.
Yeah, I mean, this one little creature. Yeah.
Basically,
it's not like the butterflies can take over.
What?
I mean, butterflies are also pollinators, but they can't really do the job of the bees.
Yeah.
There's just not enough of them.
We're not as lucky as Africa and Australia, who have giant bats to do the job for them.
Oh, do bats work as pollinators or what?
Yeah.
Really?
Bats work as pollinators.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yep.
Wow. That's so cool. Well, one other thing, guys, that, before we were done here with food and stuff like that, I thought that was kind of interesting is some of the technology that's going into agriculture. Because by some estimates, by 2050, we may have to increase production of food by more than half. Um, some estimates are even as high as 70%, just because of population growth and increase in basically social status of people in the developing world and demand for better food and all that. One of the things that few people talk about is basically precision farming and some of the improvements in technology. When you look at a combine or a tractor from 50 years ago, it's like just this very basic machine with a few hydraulics. And today, they're electronic marvels with GPS. And I read somewhere that the newest tractors, when they're planting seeds, they can plant them with accuracy of 3 centimeters per seed, which is incredible. Have you guys heard of these things?
I have not, man. I mean, I've seen some of these things, but I have no idea how they work. I haven't really even bothered to look into the engineering behind it, but that's 3 centimeters?
Yeah, within 3 centimeters, they can drop a seed within 3 centimeters of accuracy of what you program into that machine.
So you think that this might very soon be an automated process entirely?
Oh, it already is. It's becoming more and more precise, where today the automation is, more or less you're making sure that you have an even distribution of seeds across your field, and it's as you want it. In tomorrow's world, what they're proposing to do is to basically drop a bunch of sensors around the field to measure and these measurements will be done over time, how well land retains moisture, because how land retains moisture here in 100 yards from here may be very different. How much acidity is in the soil here in 100 yards may be different. So you would create this map basically of the land that you own. You'll find out where your best ground is, and you'll plant more heavily in those areas, less heavily in other areas. And so that's supposed to be able to increase your yields by tens of percent, just that alone. So some of the precision farming methods, I think, are also very, optimistic in terms of improvements. You guys heard of any of these things?
The cool part about that is because that's definitely great on a large scale, and that's really cool. But what we've been talking about lately is more small scale farming. And what's awesome is that we're seeing more of that precision type farming being affordable for, DIY people to do it themselves at home and buy the parts, buy the very simple robotic chips that they can program to whatever interval to plant the seeds and to maintain the garden, entirely automated, basically. And some of these kits are like as cheap as $500 to put together the parts and to automate a small garden for yourself. It's really kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, given that investment will last you, for several years at least, it's a small price to pay potentially.
And it's funny because honestly, I think it's with the help of things like what you brought into Old Crown, the Raspberry Pi. I think that's what's really helping this kind of robotic technology.
Yeah, in terms of small processors that can connect wirelessly and do a lot of number crunching and a lot of analysis, there's a lot of cheap ones out there, such as the Raspberry Pi, and there's other ones too. But yeah, it's a great platform. Yep. One of the other things in terms of precision farming that people are doing is, when they drop all these sensors in the field, they can precisely measure the moisture in the soil. And that's especially true for plants, like for people that grow almonds and for people that grow like other nuts and stuff. They're very water intensive. you know, you need many, I think it's like in the hundreds of gallons, if not in the thousands of gallons, to produce like not even a pound of almonds. I mean, it's very, very water intensive. And some of the things that people do is they'll have basically a hose running to every tree in the field. And when they measure the moisture content in the soil, they can only add the specific amount of water that tree needs. And that can be evaluated on hour by hour basis to maximize, your production. And people have reported that they've been able to save like 20 or even 30% of the water that they use by doing that and maintaining the exact same production. So there's quite a bit of tech that's coming into the agricultural industry. It's not our grandfather's industry.
That's another thing in favor of more greenhouses and more small scale farming that is indoors to some degree, just because of the fact that you lose so much of the water through transpiration and evaporation. So it really is a huge water loss. But once again, long down the line, if we converted everything to those methods, it may start generating issues as far as rainfall, because then you would be sequestering more of the water indoors and letting less outdoors, which would affect weather patterns. So, that's another secondary concern. But that's far on down the line. If we converted everything to that, then it might become a problem. But
right. Yeah, but still, I mean, at least even if it'll have to be done smart. It have to be done for crops that are more water intensive, maybe. So we don't have a huge impact on the environment, but we can increase the production of some crops that we deem important for us. So I don't know. We've wasted about half of the show on population growth and how we're going to feed all the people in the next 20 years. And I think this has been very interesting. But one of the other things that I wanted to mention was, maybe go into some of the religious changes that are expected to happen in the next 20, 30 years and so. So I've got some statistics here. And today, worldwide, 31% of the world is Christian, 24% of the world is Muslim, 16% of the world has no religion. So, we humanists fall under that category. 15% are Hindus, 7% Buddhists, and 7% other, some folk religions or Jains and like all these other smaller religions around the world. Are you guys familiar with how some of this stuff is projected to change in the world?
Well, yeah, religion is disappearing. Sorry to say it, but religion is disappearing.
No, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
And it's funny because honestly, this kind of, I'm going to forcefully kind of loop this into one topic that I kind of wanted to cover on the population growth, because this is actually very, very important. Okay, because one of the things that we have been seeing here in America is certain religious groups, most notably Christian and Mormon, that have been targeting very specifically initiatives to encourage contraception or anything even remotely related to Planned Parenthood.
Right.
So you'll see them picketing outside. You'll see them trying to shut down the funding or shut down the business itself. And that's really unfortunate. And the only thing we've ever seen come of that is worse healthcare and more babies.
Well, that's true. That's true.
So I want to bring that up because that's a very important factor. If in the future these religions are disappearing and becoming less prevalent, then honestly, the birth rate for humans should decrease, because what we see is with non-theism increasing, so does increased levels of or decreased levels of birth rates.
Well, this is an interesting point. One of the things that is projected to happen by 2050, so this will be a little more than 20, but maybe in 30 years, is because religiously unaffiliated people have less children. And I think the assumptions that they're making here are wrong, but it's projected there's a percentage of the overall population, people unaffiliated with religion, is going to drop from 16 to 13%. And the primary driver of that is, as I mentioned, is the decrease in birth rate among religiously unaffiliated people.
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily fair, because because are they suggesting that atheists or agnostics or those of no religion are having fewer children than they have in the past, or
well, in general, non-religious people have less children.
Yeah, I get that statistic. I mean, when like Catholics, for example, I bring them up a lot, but they tend to have a lot of children.
Right,
and so do Muslims and Mormons, like you had mentioned. They have a theological incentive to keep having children and prevent themselves from not trying to have children. So I honestly don't know if that might actually create a sort of blowback. I doubt it. I can only hope. But I don't know. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that the non-believers are having fewer children, so our population is going to decrease. Is that?
Well, not necessarily the population itself, but the percentage of the population.
Yeah,
see, the population of religiously unaffiliated people is going to increase, but as a percentage of the overall population, it's supposed to decrease by 2%. And this is where, however, I think that they're making the wrong assumption, because what they're assuming is that, and at least it feels that way to me. They don't necessarily describe very well the methodology behind this assumption, but what I think they're saying is that religious people or non-religious people will give birth to non-religious people, and that's the only way to grow.
Okay.
Which can't possibly be, because you wouldn't have this growth in non-religious affiliated people. You couldn't possibly reach. I mean, among millennials today, unaffiliated are 36%. If you go to our grandparents, religiously unaffiliated is in the single digits, and it's kind of a linear trend line from us to there. I mean, I guess I'm looking over here at a chart from the Pew Research, and this is from 2010, but I couldn't find the newer one. What they're showing in 2010, 18 to 29-year-olds unaffiliated were 25%. 30 to 39 were 19, 40 to 49 years are 15, and so on until you reach 70 plus, which are only 8%. So you see that the younger you are, the more likely you are to be religiously unaffiliated. But if it was true that only religiously unaffiliated people have less population growth, then it wouldn't make sense to see that kind of trend line. So there's obviously a different mechanism behind how people lose their religion. And I think it has more to do with the development of the internet, with the, expansion of our news sources, easy ways to research religion and to reach other people of different religion, different beliefs, and to communicate with them, and all kinds of stuff like that. I think that's much more important to the changes of the religious landscape than just sheer population growth.
And you're absolutely right. It's much easier to indoctrinate somebody who lives in a basement on Mars than it is to indoctrinate somebody who has access to the internet and every single bit of information on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I still don't think that they're wrong to say that maybe in 20 years worldwide, the biggest religious group would be Muslims. I mean, they're projected because of population growth and all that to basically grow faster than any other group. So, you know, today they're 24%. Maybe in 2050 they'll be, 30, 35, and Christians would have dropped a little bit. So they'll be the biggest group. But I think the non-religious group is easily gonna overtake Christians. Maybe not in the next 20 years, maybe in the next 30 to 40 years. I think we'll easily be able to do that, just based on the fact that, if today 36% of millennials are not religiously affiliated, that trend is not likely to change when they have kids, and as religion becomes just less and less important in our just day-to-day life, even of religious people. Fewer and fewer people attend services and all that, so their kids are less likely to do it. And I think the snowball, especially in the Western world, is gonna end up in favor of the non-religious people.
And the fact that we're liberating more and more countries and getting them to be more democratic, I think that's really going to help too.
I feel like it's a little tongue in cheek there.
Yeah.
But I get your point. Yeah.
Well, in 20 years, we're going to have a whole new generation of 20-year-olds. And, you guys have been saying this whole time, basically, that it seems as though the young people in this country seem to be less religiously affiliated than they have been in the past. And I think that's going to be a trend that's going to continue to grow, mostly due to the fact that we have the fact to fight their fiction on almost every front that I can think of. Short of speculation on the first mover, I mean, we could pretty much show these children how the world operates without the need for a God. And if they're not being fed, these constant Sunday services, like you were saying, Bess, if your people are attending church or mass on Sundays in this country, I think that's just going to fuel the fires here. And I'm optimistic, I should say, that our numbers are going to be looking pretty good, so long as our movement continues to push forward.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. We have the facts on our side, we have the science on our side, and that's all we really need. We don't have to misrepresent anything. We can be honest about how we see the world, what we know about the world. We can say, I don't know, I don't have an explanation for that, but here's what we do know. And that really is on our side. And when you think about it, the younger generation, I mean, we are more tech savvy than our parents, and our children are going to be more tech savvy than us. And today's cell phones are so powerful. I mean, NASA didn't have computers like that 20, 30 years ago, and we have them in our pockets today. In another 20 years, the kids are going to have artificial intelligence type devices in their pocket that they're going to be able to verify facts in seconds. When you tell them some nonsense, they'll walk out of that church service or religious service or whatever, and they're going to be able to get on their phone and fact check basically what they just heard in just a matter of seconds. And they're going to find out that this is not supported by science, or it's only vaguely, possible to be true, or, they're going to get the facts, and that's powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I think essentially we're there, by and large. I mean, pretty much every phone is a personal computer these days, and Dr. Google, there's not a whole lot he's unaware of. So it's all out there for the most part. And the problem is, obviously, like you were saying, trying to fact check, cross-reference everything, make sure everything lines up, that we can know these things to be more true or more likely to be true than not, these sorts of things. And I think that in future generations, because we have these capabilities, I think that things are going to start becoming much, much more nuanced and very, very quickly. I think, once you start nitpicking on specific very, very, very specific criteria, conversation school kind of take a paradigm shift, I think, once everybody realizes and utilizes this information in approximately the same way, to the same means. Like you were saying, to use it to fact check. Once people realize that they can do this already, I think, and the technology is going to continue to grow, like you were saying, maybe there's going to be an AI where you can just ask it to do that for you. I don't know how much I would trust that AI, but I'd give it the benefit of the doubt.
Well, yeah, and Chris, maybe you can speak a little bit to this since we're talking about the future. I think what the internet is going to allow is basically a complete revolution in education, and that's another point. It's not just fact checking things here and there, but just education in general is going to bring about this decrease in religiosity around the world, in my opinion. And
yeah, you're absolutely right, because of the fact that we have such great cooperations between different universities that are really big universities like MIT and Caltech and Harvard and Berkeley. All these universities coming together and being able to offer 100% free online courses. They're actual college courses that you learn a lot of stuff from through edX.com. I mean, that's just the beginning of the revolution in education online that's free and available to anyone.
Yeah, and that's at the college level, right? But that's also going to filter down to every level of education. High school, middle school, elementary, all that, and I think we're going to find potentially what I would love to see is to be able to find a better way to teach foreign languages, because I think if kids at an early age can learn a foreign language a little bit easier, because today, learning a foreign language is tedious. You have to memorize words and all that. But if we can make it just a little bit easier to where kids will be able to learn them better, and at that point in time, you can have a kid in Indonesia or Iran or Namibia or some underdeveloped country in the world take a course from MIT or something like that and be able to understand it very well. I think that's going to be, that's where the revolution is really going to come.
No, you're absolutely right. Secondary education right now and even primary education, they're both in the garbage stage right now because there are so many schools popping up everywhere, private schools, charter schools, whatever, many of them religious, that are popping up and offering online classes in order to try to grab the state funding or the federal funding for education, and offering very little in return and being held to very, very low standards, if any. And they're literally just there robbing money from everyone else. There are millions of dollars that Fort Wayne Community Schools didn't get for this school year because those millions of dollars went elsewhere, to online school choices and to private schools and charter schools, all these other craptastic places that don't have to uphold to any level of standard, and honestly just result in the dumbing down of the kids.
Yeah, that's a potential big danger, is when some of this online learning is put together by people with a specific agenda that is not necessarily the education of people. So people really have to be careful where they get their information from. I mean, reputable organizations like MIT, like Caltech, like all these other places, are probably great sources of information. But I mean, I've been watching on TV every day. I see at least 4 or 5 commercials for online education at the high school and middle school level. I mean, that's what the kids look like on the commercial. And I've really wondered, like, what is the quality of that education? I mean, I really don't think we're there yet. I think we can get there where that stuff, online education and stuff like that is much better. But I really am skeptical of where we are today.
Yeah, I think we're in a state of turmoil as far as that's concerned. I think that the future of our education is very wishy-washy. The future is clouded, if you will. I don't really know how to predict one way or the other. I mean, it seems like there are two very, very different schools of thought on this matter. And you can see how Chris's views are much different than somebody who, for example, wants to support these charter schools and argue for that, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm actually really concerned about this. I've been thinking a lot about my own son's education as of late. It's only going to be a couple of years before he starts going to school. And I've officially come to the opinion that I don't think it matters at what grade level he's at. It's all extremely important. At first I was thinking, oh, it's just elementary school. They're going to teach them the ABCs, the colors, multiplication, very, very basic stuff. Doesn't really matter. But, I've noticed a difference. I have a very large family, and some of them are much more religious than others, but by and large, you can see a difference. And then one thing that doesn't really change much across the board is mathematics. That seems to be pretty standard. But as far as everything else is concerned, history, science, English, even, you see these really unusual. Like, okay, I was talking with my I shouldn't. Hold on, let me start that over. For example, I was talking with somebody about their daughter's education, and I wanted to just kind of talk to the daughter about that education. What are they doing, and what is the type of thing that she's learning, and it's just kind of mind-boggling when somebody goes to one of these private schools that are extremely religious, and you hear those children recite what they think is history. And this one really crushed me. Right? This particular person is a creationist and sent their children to a creationist school, so they're telling me all about Noah being a legitimate part of history, and that just kind of crushes me a little bit when you hear something like that. And but like I said, there are certain things that are pretty universal, like mathematics. And I think that the one big thing that's really going to impact us are science classes and English classes. I think those two are really important. And I'm hoping that we can create a sort of system that is just, screw creating. We just need to work on what we've got. Just take a step back, reevaluate the situation, and reinvest, because it's kind of silly. I've heard Chris talk about a lot of the problems that he's had, and I listen to people all across the United States really talk about the level of education that they receive and their children receive, and it's mind-boggling how big this continuum is from one side to the other. And I don't really know what to do about that. I've said this on other episodes. I don't know what to do about this problem, but it scares me, honestly.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard for a parent to judge the quality of education that they're going to get in an institution for their kids. At least we know that public schools have certain standards that they have to adhere to. They're not perfect, but we know the standards, and we know that they're not necessarily in it for the money, which is not always a bad thing, but it certainly kind of makes you question it with something like education. It's not like buying some product where you can easily comparison shop. I like Nike, you like Adidas. Well, they're probably all fine. But with schools, it's a lot harder to judge. And there's a lot at stake. Like, potentially you would affect the future of your child for their entire life by just this one decision. So yeah, it's definitely a tough thing to do and to decide on.
But one of the things that isn't often brought up in these conversations is that there's an awful lot of internal regulation, right? So I have people looking over me and judging my performance, and they want to make sure that I'm performing at the level that I should be, to have kids that are performing at the level that they should be, and that we are trying to improve certain problem areas. And I don't think people realize that. I'm not just in this permanently for the next 10 years. My job is always up for sale every single year. So it's something that's constantly regulated.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.
I